everyone, to the fifth and final session of our risk management program training series. I'm Jen Plowden from the Land Trust Alliance. Good to see you all. We're really pleased to be here again tonight. I can't believe we're already coming to the end of this training program. It's been great to have you all along. I think we all are pretty, we kind of all are on the same page about ground rules and being on mute, and I don't think I need to cover too much of that tonight. I just want to say one more time, thank you to CLCC for partnering with us on this, and to Connie for delivering this great material, and one more shout out to the PCLB Foundation for their support of the Alliance, which makes this program possible. We have a lot planned today, so I'm going to hand it over to Connie to get us started. Thanks, Connie.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, well, so I think that you all know me by now, but just, to reiterate, who I am and what I do. I'm Connie Manis. I live in Kent, Connecticut. I'm a consultant for the Land Trust Alliance, also for CLCC and others, and I work in particular in the areas of organizational capacity building and land trust accreditation. I've had the opportunity to work one-on-one with so many of you, which I love that about my work. But I also work as a practitioner, as the executive director of the Kent Land Trust. And so for me, that's really helpful because I'm not just like the consultant telling you what to do. I am also a person who has to do it in real life. So I feel that that kind of lends a perspective or a lens of reality to what you might otherwise hear from the people who are just, passing along best practices because, I really have to do it too, just like you do. I really appreciate the time that you've given over the course of the last month to learn about and discuss risk management and how it applies to our land trust work. Today, we're going to take a peek at the tool developed by the Land Trust Alliance to help assess risk and take risk management steps. So we're going to play around in the tool itself in a little bit. My hope is that you'll use the tool, whether in one-on-one assistance, which is the next phase of this particular initiative, maybe internally on your own with a team from your organization, or even intermittently as you encounter specific instances where you want to analyze your organizational risk and think about steps to reduce the magnitude of the risk impact or the likelihood of the outcome of occurrence, or ways that you might shift risk to an insurer or to another risk bearer. And so we're not going to go through the slides that I've done each and every time with the vocabulary or the risk matrix today. But what I did want to do is maybe a quick review of the main areas that we've touched upon over our last 4 sessions and a few of the strategies that we've discussed for managing risks in these areas. So our first session, or our first substantive session, that related to land trust buckets, was on governance, and some of the things that we spoke about were corporate laws and compliance and strategies for risk management within that area, including making sure that you're regularly filing the things that were mandated to file as nonprofit organizations, making sure that we have knowledge of and adherence to prohibitions associated with tax-exempt organizations, like prohibitions on political campaigning, on lobbying, on private annulment and impermissible private benefit, having and adhering to a records retention policy required by law, avoiding conflicts of interest wherever possible, and if they cannot be avoided, ensuring that policies are followed and no undue influence affects the organization's decisions. We also talked about board fiduciary responsibilities, and so we talked about those duties of care, loyalty, and obedience, and strategies for managing risks associated with that, including making sure that you have a board training program, training or orientation, maybe having written board job descriptions or other documents that explain what board responsibilities are, having board policies and a policy manual. Those are all good tools for risk management Board makeup and capacity. Strategies associated with that might include implementing term limits and planning for board transitions, board assessment and targeted recruiting, so using a matrix to kind of analyze what you have and what you need, recruitment procedures, delegation to committees on a board to make sure that the work is spread around and that you have the capacity to do that, having a diversity of representation and perspectives on one's board, and having a diversity of skills and experiences. We talked about board functioning and the strategies, including having a strategic plan, having annual work plans, an annual budget, conducting regular board evaluation to make sure your board is functioning well together, good board processes and documentation for keeping the board informed and ready to make decisions. So regular board meetings, notice and board materials going out to the board prior to meetings, and encouraging really a robust discussion prior to taking action in the board. And then finally, we talked about personnel, employees, contractors, and volunteers, and strategies associated with risk management, including having personnel policies, an adequate awareness of employment laws and required filings, ensuring that you have correct paperwork, making sure that people are trained and supported in their work with not just supervision, but really having what they need in order to do their job, and maybe purchasing insurance, including directors and officers insurance. In the finance and financial management bucket, we talked about having adequate finances to cover ongoing operating expenses, and the strategies for risk management having to do with that, including planning for diverse income streams, right? So not just relying on one funding source, budgeting for a balance in between income and expenses so that you end in the black, regular reporting to and examination of financial reports by the board to ensure consistency with budget forecasts. We talked about having reserves to cover perpetual expense needs, including strategies like for each acquisition, forecasting future stewardship expenses, tracking your historical stewardship expenses to ground truth your expectations in doing those forecasts, purchasing insurance, and investing reserves wisely with a view to the intended use of those reserves. Any operation has risks, of course, associated with the possibility of theft and misuse, misplacement of funds. So strategies to prevent losses include implementing internal controls and procedures to limit those risks, such as having at least 2 people touching each and every transaction, and periodic independent review and reconciliation of financial accounts. So again, this is just a quick review, not exhaustive because we don't have 4 hours to do this again, but just to kind of remind you and put it back in your head what the risks associated with each of these buckets really are. For land transactions, we talked about finding opportunities for protection and the risks associated with those, and some strategies including using mapping and GIS to see how your landscape or ecological systems relate, having project selection criteria, having processes for site visits and board deliberation on prospective projects would be a few. We talked about ensuring sound and durable transactions that can withstand legal challenge, and where the method of protection ensures the conservation values will remain protected, and strategies to address risk in these areas include having good legal representation, title investigation and insurance, having surveys and knowledge of the property boundaries and how those relate on the ground, examining the properties for environmental hazards, recording immediately after closing, and maintaining evidence-ready copies of transaction documentation in your permanent records. We talked about following tax and nonprofit laws and making sure that one's donors are aware of tax laws and regulations, and strategies associated with that again include having good legal representation, examining transactions for consistency with the law, so examining them internally as well, informing prospective donors of tax laws and regulations, and having processes for acknowledging land and easement gifts and for reviewing donors' forms 82, 83 prior to signing them. Finally, last week, we talked about stewardship. We talked about caring for properties and upholding conservation easements and strategies associated with that, including having management plans for your owned properties that include information on the conservation values and what needs to happen in order to protect them. For easements, having baseline documentation reports with information about conservation easements that help monitor and enforce them. Monitoring all your properties, at least annually and more frequently if needed, to ensure that you know what's happening there, and putting money aside so that your organization will be able to do this in perpetuity. Also putting aside additional reserves to defend properties and easements based on experience, projections, and tools like the Conservation Defense Calculator that we looked at last week, as well as purchasing Terrafirma Conservation Defense Insurance to cover those high magnitude risks like encroachments and violations that need substantial legal defense. We also talked about management interventions like treating and removing invasive plants, dealing with beavers, manipulating habitat, conducting forestry operations, and installing trails and infrastructure, and strategies for risk management associated with those activities, including keeping up with best management practices always, ensuring that people conducting management activities are well trained and have the proper equipment, ensuring that public access areas are safe and well maintained, and having policies and procedures in place. And then finally, we talked about assessing threats, including those from encroachments, trespass, and other violations, and risk management strategies such as knowing your easement owners and property neighbors, keeping careful documentation, including documentation of when things change, such as the exercise of a reserve right, enrolling in Terrafirma, and being aware of case law and other industry developments. Lastly, we talked about programs, and we talked about working with volunteers and welcoming different groups, including children, seniors, people with disabilities, and allowing for increased public use, including bikes or motorized equipment hunting, really branching out from, some of our early, have a preserve, maybe have a goat trail, days to a time when we're welcoming many more people onto the land and using it in ways that we might not have originally envisioned. And strategies connected with risk management in your programs include the careful vetting and training and supervision of the people that are doing the programs, including volunteers, making sure that you have safety precautions in place, including information about the use and what to expect. So good signage would be an example of that. Good infrastructure design, making sure that first aid and personal protective equipment are available during your public programs, having contingency plans, having connectivity to emergency services is another good one, using waivers and supplementing those waivers with insurance, yours and maybe someone else's too. If someone is conducting a program on your land, they can name you as an additional insured. So that's my quick review. And if we have time, we can go into questions at the end, but I wanted to get into this risk management tool and show you what it's all about. But first we have a poll. And so our first poll is, now that we kind of reviewed some of these areas of risk, which areas present the greatest risk for your organization? And you'll see I put the buckets down here, but I put a lot of other words that may mean different things to you, only because the areas that the tool uses don't directly correspond to the standards and practices buckets. So which areas do you think are the greatest risks in your own organization? Let's leave it open for a couple more minutes, or whatever, a minute. About 15 people have responded. And some of the big winners are risks in the governance area and the stewardship area. Not many with huge safety risks. I like to see that. Reputational risks, maybe not too bad either. Does anyone have any comments or anything that you'd like to share about why you answered the poll the way you did? I guess I can look at a grid so we can have hands. Yeah, Lee, do you want to share?
Yeah, I clicked land protection because that is sort of the central mission of a land trust of ours, or many. And I think any weaknesses in governance, finance, accountability, fundraising, all the other ones, comes back to land protection. I mean, all of these things are risks. And I mean, I could have checked every box, but I think I checked just land protection because I think that's ultimately what the land trust is, their responsibility, what they're trying to do, their mission or whatever, however you want to phrase it. And these other things are how we get to that. And certainly all those combined, the cumulative weakness of or risk of governance, finance, stewardship, comes down to they're all a risk for land protection. So that's the one I checked.
Are there specific areas of the land protection function that you think are riskier than others, either for your organization or for organizations generally that you're hearing about?
Well, I think that if we were challenged, shall we say, by a negative risk happening in one of these other areas, I think it would affect our ability to protect the land. I think that would be the sort of the basis of it. For example, if our treasurer walked away with our investment account, that would affect our ability to protect the land. If for some reason we had some kind of a liability associated with stewardship of a land trust property, and we lost on that account, that would affect our ability to protect the land. All of these things really cycle back to what we're trying to accomplish fundamentally, which is maintain perpetual forested acreage on our properties. I mean, I would love to have more specifics, but I think from sort of the 30,000 foot review of these major categories, that to me, that's why I'm on the call. Okay, that's why I think many of us are here, because we want to be successful in that regard.
Anyone who said governance want to lend a thought on what is most risky about what's going on governance-wise? And you don't have to.
I wanted to follow up on what Lee just said. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think that's a very good point. That in the end of things, everything boils down to land protection. And I shared in the breakout session, I think it was in the first week, that I see as a major risk for our land trust, but any land trust, again, where all these points come together, but some perception, and therefore it's reputational risk as well, that people are donating properties to land trust, mostly for tax benefit and not for the true spirit of land protection. And again, it comes to all these areas. If you have a governance, structure that doesn't sufficiently, do due diligence on these properties, or any of the other areas are kind of, there's some corruption around those standards, I think this is a risk. And even to the point, if this is in generally a headline, as far away as Oregon from here, and that becomes persistent about land trust, and this is what's happening with them, it's a risk for all of us. So I think actually Lee summed it up very well, that all these things are connected. And, governance is clearly important, because I think it's how you organize your board and your people around overseeing this. And we have actually, at the moment, for ourselves, it's not at all a risk, but we've discovered that our process for reappointing the president is lacking a little bit in the bylaws, whereas I think the rest of our bylaws are strong. We revised them, but this is one area I'd like to learn from other land trusts, or I can even go to any NGO. But again, it comes up to a point that you raised actually on one of the meetings. If you have a very strong, charismatic president who does everything and knows everybody and has all the relationships and have been there for 10 years, it becomes even harder to replace them and becomes a risk. But I'm jumping around now, but I just wanted to back up what Lee said. I thought it was a great point, and I agree. And then linking it to if you really don't do land protection, but you're in this business for something else, it's a risk on all these areas. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, the note in that land protection slide about, being able to review on your own behalf, but also to communicate to your donors, what some of the rules are around charitable deductions, making sure that they're aware of the tax regulations and that you as an organization are aware of what's going on in the industry. It is one of the ways that we will make sure that we maintain our good reputation, nationwide and with the IRS, because the conservation easement is, of course, a really important tool if we're ever going to get to 30 by 30. So yeah, okay. Anyone else before we kind of dip into the risk management tool? Brian?
Yeah, I'm really surprised more people didn't choose safety. That's the one that keeps me up at night, because it's the one on this list that I have the least control or influence over, whether somebody's getting lost on a trail or they fall and trip and break an ankle, or there's an animal attack, or even if during one of our events there's an incident of harassment. This is the one I feel like we have the least control over, and really one of the ones we're most at risk at because of it. We can have all the policies and procedures and processes and best practices in place for most of the other issues, but man, safety is the one that worries me the most.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that the point that we can all probably think about of risks that are associated with each and every one of these is true. What the tool attempts to do, and what you will see, is really help us to map out on a heat map, almost that matrix of, how do we decide where to spend our resources and where to start first. I have a button on what I'm seeing on the screen, which is share results for the poll. Do you guys see the results to the poll ever, or is that, okay? I guess I hadn't really realized that you didn't get to see those. So hopefully you can see them now. And just take a look, and I'm going to just advance the slide forward. And now I'll stop sharing the poll. Okay, and close it out. So, the tool that we're going to look at is a tool that was built by the Land Trust Alliance, and where it resides, and you'll get a chance to see this in a few minutes, is on the Terrafirma Conservation Defense Insurance website, which can be a little confusing, and we just had a short conversation about this before we started the meeting. The login, that you do not need to have purchased Terrafirma insurance in order to log into that website and use this tool. But what you do need is your Land Trust Alliance membership login so that you can use the Learning Center, right? So if you have been able to access the Learning Center, you would use that same login information to log into the Terrafirma website. And the risk assessment tool is pretty nimble. When you look at the alternative, which is offered to you, which is to download like a 300 and some page, book, which I also looked at, but I found the tool to be a little bit more nimble and what we might expect in a day of, using interactive online tools. In order to begin the risk assessment tool, you will be asked to enter your mission statement, to create your team, which we've been talking about. For me, and we're going to walk through this, I use the Kent Land Trust as an example and one risk, and then I'm hoping that we'll have a volunteer tonight to kind of practice with me. But for me, I chose myself as the executive director. I chose our board chair and our legal counsel, who is also the chair of our governance committee. I could see adding our treasurer, for example, maybe adding our director of programs or the chair of our programs committee, and definitely our land manager as well, would be people that I would consider for my team. The next section asks you to identify your risk tolerance in several areas of risk. And, this is where those categories of accountability, conservation, financial, fundraising, people, property, reputation, and safety came in. And they ask you to do this kind of on a continuum of averse, cautious, moderate, or flexible. So really to think about your organization's own tolerance for these different categories of risk. Not easy to do. And there are some descriptive words that help you to kind of map that out. Also something that, as you play around with this, you can change as time goes on. If you find that it's not really appropriate, or if you want to see how it might hash out, if you changed it a little bit. But what that results in, almost like a spider web depiction of where you are more and less risk tolerant. So with the most averse being in the middle, and where you're more willing to be a little bit more flexible, kind of pulling out to the outer places of the web. It's interesting, we'll see. And the next part is a philosophy statement, which you are prompted to devise for yourself. There are a couple of examples. I took two of them, the shortest ones, and put them over here on the right-hand side of the slide. But just kind of articulating what your organization's philosophy is with respect to risk assessment. And I also chose these two because you can see that the top one is a relatively risk-averse organization, right? That is really most concerned with protecting health and safety of visitors, whereas the bottom organization is articulating an approach that is a little bit more willing to pursue some risks in order to achieve its mission. So a little bit more bold. There's no wrong or right answer here, but you are asked to enter that into the tool, and then finally you're prompted to articulate some goals, for using the tool. So I have a second poll here, just so we can get a sense. I'm curious to see if you're like me. Can you hear me? Okay, I had a phone call come in, and sometimes that cuts my audio out for a moment. So the second poll is, how would you characterize your organization's overall approach to risk? This is a little easier than doing it for all of those categories, which we'll see. And we'll just give it a minute more. And actually, I'm a little surprised. You guys are coming in at moderate. I found myself being, I kind of skew more to the averse or cautious side of things. I don't know, maybe that's just me, my personality. But it's interesting to see that there's, the full spectrum here, and that most of you in the room tonight would consider yourselves to be moderate. All right, I'm going to move on. So I'm going to close out the poll and go to the next slide. Okay, so what next after you've done those things? The tool actually has you, do what they call appraise. which is choosing the areas that you want to focus on and then identify and articulate actual risk management strategies in connection with each of those. So you're prompted to select an activity, and here are the categories, right? So easement acquisition, easement stewardship, educational programs, fee land acquisition, fee land management, governance. I think it's governance. I don't think it's governance-y. I think that's my typo, but we'll see. Operations, political advocacy, public events, and technical assistance. And there are areas within each of those areas that you then get to select and talk about the risks that you have associated with that. And you'll describe risks and strategies and what you need to do in order to implement those strategies. And then when that's all done, they ask you to take that risk and position it on a heat map that looks similar to that rubric that I kept showing you, that is that associates, high magnitude of impact and high likelihood, and the spectrums related to those. We're going to see what that looks like. So let's check it out. I'm going to stop sharing this for a second so that I can reshare. Great. This is the Terrafirma web page, and I need to adjust my gallery view so that I can see this next button here. Okay. So when you first get into the risk management tool, which I can't show you how I got to it, but it's easy enough when you get to the home screen to find the risk management tool. You'll find the risk management program and the risk management tool. But you get this introductory screen. You are offered the opportunity to download a PDF of the book if you want. But if you don't and you just want to dive right in, which I did, then you click next. And you're prompted to talk about your risk management team. Again, they say the ideal committee is a team of 3 to 5 with diverse perspectives. And their suggestions are, you might even want to have a long-term volunteer, somebody who's a donor, somebody who knows your organization, but might be able to bring a different point of view than you, certainly, but than others on your team. Okay, so I went ahead and preloaded the Kent Land Trust mission statement, but this one's a no-brainer. We all have them. You plug it in. And then they ask you to form your risk management committee. So you can see that I added myself, the legal counsel, who's also the chair of our governance committee, and our board chair. And if I were going to put somebody else in, I would just fill in these boxes and click add. So far, straightforward. The next section of this tool is establishing the context for why you're doing this. So they do tell you to have ready a risk management philosophy, but before we even get that, we get the risk tolerance graph. Okay, here's what I was talking about. So you have these different areas, oh, sorry, I didn't know I was gonna do that, of accountability, conservation, financial, fundraising, people, property, reputation, and safety. And somewhere on here, they tell you what they mean by those things. So let me see if I can get that. So when we're talking about safety, their prompt is that programs and services can lead to personal injury risk during outdoor programs, during inclement weather, or whenever the safety of the person involved can't be guaranteed. They have a couple of examples, and they say, if something that you did caused a serious injury or death to staff, can you live with knowing? And they really present you with like the ugly consequences that could happen, based on a wrong decision or something happening that was predictable, but perhaps unlikely. And Anyway, on this particular one, you can see that you can use the slide from being very averse, where your tolerance, your avoidance of the risk is a core objective, and your tolerance for uncertainty is extremely low. Or as you move up the ladder and your rating changes, you get to the point where your tolerance is very conservative, your tolerance is low for uncertainty, and you're cautious. So you're defined as cautious as opposed to averse. Going up the scale, eventually we get to a moderate level of risk tolerance. And then finally, as you go all the way up the scale, you've got a flexible tolerance. You can go all the way up to 4. So you've got between 0 and 4. And you see my spider web stretching and being manipulated depending on where I put myself on this map. And I can't remember where I was, but I do remember that I was on this one moderate as opposed to some of the others, which is, accountability. My personal feeling was that I had a very low tolerance and would define myself as averse. And for fundraising, I also felt that way. But fun to play around with each of these things. There will be a correct spider web for each of your organizations. And as I said, as you go along with this planning, you can always come back and play around with these things and see how, your web might change if your organization adopted a little bit of a different perspective on your risk tolerance. I'm going to go to the next. Okay. The next part is your philosophy statement. Don't copy mine here. I was really just moving fast. But as I said, they have these sample statements where you can preview ones that sound a little bit more or a little bit less risk tolerant. Okay, so that's where I got those examples. Clicking next again, this is where you would identify the goals of your risk management program. I very simply went through this and made goal number 1, identifying the Kent Land Trust risks of highest magnitude and likelihood to focus risk management actions. The status was that we were at the beginning of this inquiry and that the measurement, and you can find things that will tell you kind of, what do they mean by this? What is this status? What am I supposed to put in my goal? I put as our measurement, having a written plan with action steps for the immediate year and the following 1 to 2 years afterwards. And if I wanted to have another goal, I would create it by filling in these boxes and then using that button to log in a second goal. Okay. Any questions so far, by the way? There is going to be a time where I ask for feedback on this. So, don't give me your comments on how excellent it is yet, but any questions about what I did so far? All right. Okay, so the next section of this is to do this appraisal, to start to fill in, what you think your risks are to build this plan. And the prompt is to select some areas of risk definition. And I did one that I thought we could all relate to tonight. So I used this bar of fee land management. But as you can see, they also have the categories of easement acquisition, easement stewardship, educational programs, fee land acquisition, governance, not governance-y, operations, political advocacy, public events, and technical assistance. So when I went into fee land management, I was prompted to select a risk. And when I did this, I think I chose safety. So I was on Brian's wavelength, and I wanted to, talk about a risk that I was perceiving related to safety in connection with one of our fee properties. And I preloaded this, as I said. So what I did here is, well, actually, maybe I'll go back up here and show you what happens if you wanted, if you clicked on safety. You get this set of windows where you're prompted to describe your risk, list the indicators of risk, which they here, define as the warning signs if a risk occurs, what the response would be, and your organization's capacity to manage the risk, right? So I went down and I made up a risk that I'm sure we can all relate to. Our trail has boulders and steep inclines that lead to insecure footing, and our trail users could get hurt. And the indicators that the risk occurs are that we get calls from hikers that say that it's dangerous or that they tripped. And so our response to manage that should be that we need to reroute the trail away from this area. I'm sure you can think of others, but that was what was going on in my head. And our capacity was that we need additional personnel to perform the work, and we need money for signage to reroute that trail and to give people adequate warning of what's going on so that they don't trip and fall. Once you do that, and you can do that for, as you saw, there was a way to keep adding the risks. You can do that for, several different risks. You get to this window, and this is over here. Like this is your risk right here that you just filled out. And you need to take that risk and you need to put it, put it on a heat map showing where you think it is in terms of likelihood and the impact. And here is, a high likelihood and a high impact, as opposed to a low likelihood and a low impact. And because people might twist and hurt their ankle, but they're not falling off a cliff, I chose that there was a high likelihood, but the impact was moderate, and I placed it there. And you can put it a little closer or a little farther away from, the likelihood and impact, because what will probably happen, sorry, that keeps expanding, is that you will have, 6 or 7 different risks that are clustered in this heat map. Upon clicking on next, you get a screen that tells you you should prepare to schedule updates to this plan as you make progress. I left their prompt in, you have a year to do this, but you could do it sooner or farther out. And voila, it kicks out a plan for you. There's a little bit of, language, boilerplate language in the beginning, talking about what you should do in terms of, implementing your risk management plan, checking your assumptions. So they tell you to get in touch with your attorney, that things might change. They tell you not to ignore low risk items completely, but don't spend too much time with them. And so there's just some, kind of introductory language. And then your risk management report begins. Articulation of your mission statement, your risk management team, a depiction of your personal web of risk tolerance, your philosophy statement, your goals in the plan, your heat map, which would have many, many different, items on it. But for me, just one, because that was what I just wanted to do this for demonstration purposes. And then the risk management plan approval. And they do allow you to download the plan in a Word document, which could allow you to, to play with it, to change it, to make comments on it. I just wanted to show you what that looks like. So as you can see, it's pretty much the same information. starts off with the articulation of those tips and then has your report. So I did hope to do this with one of you as a volunteer, but I think I want to get your feedback first. I just want to make sure that we don't run out of time. As you can see, it takes a little bit of time to go through it. It's pretty granular. So I did have a slide on asking for your thoughts. And we have a poll, kind of kick us off. I can see, Lee, that you have some thoughts, but let's do the poll first, if you don't mind. Thanks, Rebecca. And the poll is, are you likely to use this tool? And I'm hoping that you will share your comments afterwards, your reaction, maybe have a discussion about it, but just for starters, what do you think?
And Connie, if I could just note that there are a couple more options at the bottom, so I just want to make sure people scroll down all the way on the poll.
Dan, while we're waiting for people to finish this, I noticed that there's a question in the chat from Victor asking if you know if Terrafirma offers discounts on premiums for land trusts who complete this process. I know that they did offer a discount for organizations that attend risk management training. I'm not sure about the use of this particular tool. Do you know?
I have to look, actually. Let's see if I can find the answer to that while we're on the phone. I don't want to misspeak, though.
All right, so Rebecca, have you shared out the poll?
Oh, just shared it now.
Great, thanks. I mean, it looks like, some of you are your interest is piqued. Others are on the fence or think that it might be hard to do, just on your own. And a few, thinking that there's more preparation to do before doing the tool. I'm gonna stop sharing this screen, this slideshow, so that we can talk about this further, see what your comments might be. And I guess, I'm interested in, if you would, why? If you wouldn't, why not? What do you see as the main pros for doing something like this? Any cons? Any obstacles that you can think of, different or the same as the ones that we put in the poll? What other strategies might you employ, for risk management if you weren't going to use the tool? And what you would do with what you learned from this. So, Lee, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I've got a different problem. Okay, I mean, the example you used of somebody falling on a trail was a really good one. It's sort of analogous to what we've had here in the Northeast with all the deadfall from the oak mortality. We have our trails, and anytime it's windy or wet out, we've got all kinds of stuff raining down on people that are out on the trails. But the problem or the situation, I guess, with what I'll call a trail accident, it's really clear that it's a risk to the hiker. But I'm sort of thinking that the people on our board would say, it's not a risk to the organization. Put up some signs. Somebody goes out, it's on them. I mean, as long as we do put some signs up and say, keep your eyes up over your head if you're going to, walk the trail on a wet, windy day, you might get a branch coming down on you. That's a risk to the user, not a risk to the land. I guess we wouldn't be making the connection between liability on our part and common sense on the part of somebody that's going out for a hike. And I mean, that's so far away from trying to convince some people on our board that we ought to all get a group together and sit down and spend, multiple hours assessing all the different risks that we might face. I don't even think we'd look at that as being a risk to the Wolf Den Land Trust. We would think we wouldn't get to that. And that's, I'm guessing that's wrong. But
well, I think that's
an
interesting perspective, but I think that's why you get that, that preamble to the plan that says, check this out with your attorney. It is one way, Lee, of getting people together on your board so that they can share their thoughts together. I don't know that I would agree entirely that it's a risk on the hiker. I do think that, putting up signs is one mitigation strategy, but definitely, this gives you an opportunity to get the perspectives of a few people, get them talking about it and getting more creative instead of just making the assumption like you have, that your board and where they would come down if they actually were seriously to have a conversation about, about the likelihood that somebody could get hurt on one of your trails and you might get sued for it. So anyway, and thanks, Kim, for your comment that, that this might move you forward further, in your accreditation bid. I think that's true. Anytime that you have an opportunity for people working within an organization to kind of sit down and examine the risks in all of these different areas, I think that the argument for accreditation, as we recognized last week, becomes stronger. Anyone else? Thoughts about using a tool like this? Ways that you might use it? Julie?
Hi, Connie. Thanks for this. I guess I'm wondering, perhaps naively, I feel like we're in pretty good shape on several fronts, but there's one thing that really troubles me, which is we have two structures. So it's not land, right? These are buildings. And I worry a lot about the risk of having those buildings on our properties. And should we even have them? Should we not? Should we rent them? Should we tear them down? Should we donate them? So I'm wondering if this tool would be helpful in addressing a very specific type of risk as opposed to doing like a big overview. I don't know your thoughts about that.
I think it would. As I played with the tool, I really realized that if you had something pressing on your mind, that you could go when I first looked at it and I looked at all those categories, and then I looked at all the categories within the categories, and then I thought about all the different risks within all of the categories within the categories, I went, oh my gosh, that's a lot, but then as I started to think about, well, what if I was just really, thinking about a new property that we had, and maybe it has a building on it, and maybe I'm trying to decide what to do with that building. Do I tear it down? Do I board it up? Do I make it available? Do I need to put security in on it? In that list, if you remember, there was a category called property. I was surprised to find that property was not land. That would be my assumption, is property is like the properties you've protected, but that was not the case. Property was things that you owned, so it was like business equipment and buildings and things like that. So there was a whole category that related to that. And so my thought is that probably you could just go in and run the analysis, specifically on that area. You could also run this analysis over time. And as you saw, I ran back and forth through the one that I set up for the Kent Land Trust. And so, if you didn't have the time or the bandwidth to do it all at once, you could come back and revisit and continue to build it later.
Great. Thank you, Connie.
All right. I'm seeing this conversation in chat about the Connecticut Land Use Recreation Act, and I'm assuming we're talking about the Recreational Liability Act, which provides some some relief from liability if people are not charged for the use of recreational land. That still doesn't mean that you might not get sued, and so most of us do purchase property insurance, despite the fact that that a plaintiff might not be able to prevail if they get hurt on the property. If somebody came on one of your properties and there was a attractive nuisance, as they call them in law school, there was maybe an old mine that you had failed to appropriately fence off and protect people from falling into, you might be found liable for that, regardless of the rec liability statute. So I just, let's take one more, because I do have one additional slide before we close. And so Stephen, you had your hand up. You're on mute.
Yeah, can you hear me all right now? Yeah,
yep.
Sorry. So I initially misunderstood this tool. When you said it's a risk management tool, I thought this is a way to evaluate your whole risk for your organization. But I think what I'm understanding now is that it's more a decision-making tool or a risk assessment tool for a decision that you might be facing. And I was going to say, well, I don't have any resources to apply this to the organization wide, but to a specific decision, and we're facing one right now, then I think this could be very, very helpful to sort of weigh all the different factors going together. So I like it in the end, but I hadn't really understood the purpose. So just that's my comment.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good observation. I think that's consistent with, what I thought that it might be initially. I thought it was going to be something that, spit out the answers of what you should do. And it doesn't do that. But what it does help you do is focus in on, the risks that you're most concerned about, and to put together, a plan or your decision-making tool to help you, focus your efforts and, kind of tick off, some of the activities that you might know that you need to do in order to, to manage your risk. Thanks. And I guess also to call attention in the chat box that looks like, Jen, you found the answer to the question on the discount. Yeah,
so I need to figure out what the deadline is for using the risk risk planner in order to get the discount on the Terrafirma for policy year 2022. But I don't have that answer right now, so I can include that in some follow-up materials, though it is generally one of the handful of opportunities that they make available as a way of getting that discount. Stay tuned.
Great. And so also in the chat, you'll see that we've placed a link to an evaluation form. This is the first time that we've run this course, and we're really interested in what you have to say about it, because I think it'll help us to, to tweak and form, reformat it when we do it again, if we do it again. It'd be really helpful to know what aspects of the program were most useful to you, what worked and what didn't, what suggestions that you might have for improving it. And I did want to thank you. And it's hard to tell on my slide, but these are turkeys. So this is my thank you and my wish for you that you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Because the photo's not so great, I'm going to turn it off so that we can all see each other. And again, I'm just really grateful for you're hanging in there for 5 different Mondays with us, and talking with us about risk management. And Rebecca or Jen, do you want to say a little bit about the next phase, just to remind people of the timing?
Jen, I've got just a couple housekeeping notes, and then do you want to wrap up with the application portion? Is that okay? Okay, so I just wanted to, thank you all as well. It was fun. It was organizing our attendance list earlier today, and to see how many of you have stuck it out for all 5 or the majority of these meetings and have been so active in the process is it's really encouraging, and that's just exactly what we like to see with these types of programs. So thank you all for taking this time on Monday again. And we will be providing the recordings. I'm, in addition to being program manager, the video editor. So I'm working on getting those edited and up on YouTube for your reference if you missed a session, or if you'd like to share them or just go back and check your notes. I will provide those links to you via email, as well as the slides that Connie has shared during those presentations. And then, I just want to draw attention to the fact that Jen placed a survey in the chat. I will follow up with that link as well, although maybe take it now while it's fresh in your head. And that would be really, really helpful. And then, Jen, if you'd like to talk a little bit.
Thanks, Rebecca. We'll be sending out, you'll probably get a message from both Rebecca and myself with different follow-up materials, but I just put the link to the application in the chat as well. That is open until the end of this month, the 30th. So we hope that you will apply. And if you have some questions about your eligibility or really anything about it, please don't hesitate to reach out and get in touch, because we want to make sure that everyone is applying that is interested in doing that. And I'll also send out some of the risk management and Terrafirma discount materials so that you have those as well. We'll make sure that those are included. So thank you all again. Thank you to Connie for a wonderful session. Thanks to Rebecca and CLCC for all of their support in making this possible. And we hope to see your applications and continue thinking about risk management with you. So have a good night.